All right, histology. So we're going to continue with the digestive tract. So we had made our way down to the stomach. So this one's just going to be taking a look at mainly the stomach and what's going on there, and then we'll differentiate a few different things within that. So I mean, when it comes to the stomach, it really is kind of a food pouch. We're going to get some of this mechanical digestion continuing, start a breakdown of proteins, a little bit of absorption taking place, but more than anything, it really serves as a container to allow us to digest and absorb foods over a period of time versus right as we've ingested them. So what we're going to see is this is going to take that bolus of food we swallowed, mix it with acid and a few other things, and that's going to produce what we call chyme. So you can see the stomach here, they kind of call it a J-shaped pouch. You can see the esophagus coming down. It goes to the cardiac region, mainly because if you get acid going up into the esophagus, it's heartburn. You have the highest rounded dome part there called the fundus. You can see you have the greater and lesser curvatures in terms of the parts of the stomach there, and then it narrows down to what's called the pyloric canal, and we have a sphincter that is controlling when stuff moves from the stomach into the duodenum. There's also a sphincter up here at the bottom of the esophagus, and again, that's a circle of muscle that is going to regulate when stuff enters or exits the stomach. So the stomach mucosa, we're going to see it is mainly going to be simple columnar epithelium, but we have these invaginations, these down pouches going down in here, and these are called gastric pits. And we're going to have a few different things going on there. The rest of this is pretty similar. The submucosa and the muscularis mucosa are pretty typical of the digestive tract, but we do have these gastric glands or pits diving down in there, and we're going to identify a few different cell types on these. So you can see the surface of the mucosa would be somewhere up here, but you have these columnar cells lining these pits that are dropping down. Again, pretty standard lamina propria, standard muscularis mucosa, and submucosa. We're going to see there is a little bit of difference in the muscularis as we get down a little bit further, but let's look at the epithelium first. So when we look at the upper part of the stomach, the main body and the fundus, the higher regions of that, those pits tend to be a little bit shorter. They're not quite as deep. Again, we have what we're going to see are called mucous neck cells, parietal cells, chief cells, and enteroendocrine cells, and we're going to be identifying at least a couple of those types histologically. So you can kind of see this right here. You have this surface epithelium right here. These are going to be surface mucous cells. We then have what are called mucous neck cells right here, parietal cells, and then chief cells down a little bit further. And we're going to see these, you can tell these apart a little bit based on how they look. So you can see a zoomed out version of the stomach mucosa. Again, you don't see those glands dropping all the way down there. We can see what is down in the bottom here, but in a lot of them you don't see it going from the surface all the way down. And again, it's because whatever plane we slice in, you may or may not have that actual pit that you're seeing. So here, if we zoom in a little bit more, you can see it a little bit better on that one. So as we get down into this glandular epithelium, you can see that there's some darker staining cells. So you can see right here, and a lighter staining cell. That is going to be some of these different cell types that we're worried about. So again, a few different types here. You have the mucous neck cells. So these ones are up near the surface, at the top of those pits and at the surface. And these ones make a bicarbonate-rich, which is an alkaline, mucus, which is going to help protect the stomach from what the other cells are making, which are proteases, which digest proteins, and hydrochloric acid, which is obviously a pretty nasty acid. This prevents the stomach from really digesting itself, this protective mucus. These parietal cells we're going to see are a little bit further down. They, like it says, they're intensely eosinophilic. They take on that pinkish red stain a lot. So lots of mitochondria. They take a bunch in there. They have a lot of cellular pumps. These are the cells that are going to generate the hydrochloric acid by proton pumps and some other stuff there. Like it says, into the neck, down to the body of that gland. Again, we'll see these under the scope here in the image in just a minute. A little bit further down and much more basophilic, because they're doing a lot of protein synthesis, we're going to have what are called the chief cells. These make a prohormone called pepsinogen, which when it gets in contact with hydrochloric acid gets activated to pepsin, which is a protease, which will cleave proteins at particular amino acid sequences and break them apart. Again, very basophilic because we're doing so much protein synthesis. That hematoxylin stain binds much more to endoplasmic reticulum and that protein that it's being made there. So if we're looking at this here, you can see on these arrows right here, this very pink cells, these would be those parietal cells, where the chief cells are the much darker staining, purple staining cells. So that's that basophilic versus acidophilic staining again. There is also some stem cells present here. Because we're doing a lot of acidity, a lot of proteases, there is going to be some damage to these cells every once in a while. So these are cells that have a very high turnover, that we are continuing making new cells that are replacing these ones that are damaged or lost. And again, they're kind of in the nearing part of that gland. And then further down, and I won't have you identify these, but we have what are called enteroendocrine cells. And these cells make a hormone called gastrin, which actually acts on the stomach as well as the intestines, but mainly the stomach, to actually increase motility, increase secretion of stomach contents. So more HCl, more pepsinogen, more gastrin is going to lead to both those things happening, as well as more stomach churning. There is these cells called D cells that release somatostatin when acid levels get too high, and it's going to inhibit that gastrin secretion, so tone down the stomach once we get enough in there. And there is some other cells that release something that should inhibit increased, this ghrelin increases appetite, so it goes up during when you haven't ate. So the pyloric region, these are a little bit longer pits. Again, go a little bit of these glands going into each pit there. Mucous nut cells, stem cells. So you can see these down here a little bit more. Not having as many of those other cell types there. You can see these are much deeper. I don't know that I'm going to have you do the pyloric mucosa versus the body and cardiac or fundus region. Again, you don't see those different cell types quite as much in here, though. A lot more protective stuff at this point. The cardiac region have pretty similar to the pyloric region, except the pits are a lot shorter. And really, the stuff that's entering the stomach there tends to look a lot like the pyloric region. So mucous neck cells, stem cells. So the main thing is here, if we're looking at the different here, cardiac and the pyloric region both have these pits that are just mucus and stem cells. Big difference is cardia is much longer. The pyloric region is much longer. The cardiac region is much shorter. Where the fundus and body cells here, they're going to have more of these glandular cells in here, those parietal and chief cells, which, like I said, are definitely going to be cells I'm going to have you identify when we actually go and look at the digital slides. Outside of that, submucosa is pretty standard. Going to have blood vessels, lymphatics, nervous tissue in there. That, again, these plexuses that are going to help regulate motility and control of the digestive tract. The other big difference with the stomach is it has an inner oblique layer. So on top of those two layers of muscle that we said would be everywhere in this alimentary canal, the stomach is going to have a third one, which is not really circular, it's not longitudinal, it's in between those, and it's that oblique layer. And again, it's because the stomach does a lot of churning and mixing of materials. Outside of that, there will be that connective tissue with the mesothelial lining called the serosa. So again, you can see outer longitudinal, middle circular, and then this inner oblique that is kind of different than both of those. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at a slide here. I'll make sure you can identify the mucus, not the mucus, but the parietal and chief cells. And then we'll look at some of the rest of that, and then we'll continue on with small intestine. All right, so we're going to take a quick look at the stomach here, and then I might show you one other slide where it's kind of showing you the pyloric region where it transitions into the duodenum, which is always an interesting slide as well. So this shows you a little piece of the stomach. This would be kind of more of the fundus region. You can see some of the main layers right off the bat. So you can see the epithelium, the submucosal layer right here, and then the muscularis right there. So what I'm going to do is zoom in on the gastric pits. So if we zoom in on these gastric pits here a little bit, you can see some of this. I'm going to move it up a little bit. You can see some color differences as we work through here. So you can see up at the surface, these would be those surface mucus cells up here. But then as we work our way a little bit deeper, and I might even zoom in a little bit more on these ones. So as you start looking at these cells there, you can see these ones that are just intensely pink. Like this light pink, filled with pink, kind of a nucleus, and that's all you see. Then we see these cells down deeper near the bottom of this, which are much darker staining. These light pink ones right here, these would be those parietal cells that are making the hydrochloric acid. Where these ones down a little bit further here, these are going to be the chief cells. And the chief cells are making that pepsinogen. So the other slide to look at here real quick. This is overall kind of showing you the stomach transitioning to the small intestine. So there's a couple of things that this one's always kind of a neat slide to look at because there's some big changes that happen almost immediately. So you can see that pyloric sphincter right here is in this a huge chunk of smooth muscle here, which is kind of interesting. The other thing that's kind of interesting, if we zoom in on some of the epithelium here, you can kind of see where the dividing line is. So these right here you can see are those gastric pits. And you can see it kind of starts to transition, and then right after we turn the corner here, you can see this submucosal gland right here. And this is something we're going to talk about in the next one. This is called a Brunner's gland, and that is something you see only in the duodenum. So on this slide here, that is one of the ways you can tell apart that this is switched, is if you start going here, you can start seeing all these Brunner's glands as we start transitioning to the duodenum, which you don't see them at all in the stomach. So next time we'll take a look at some of the small intestine stuff and how we differentiate the three parts of that, and then again we'll continue moving on.